Chapter 1. The Unwanted Proposal. Once upon a time, there lived a young girl named Sophie. She was a vibrant and ambitious 25-year-old who had dreams as vast as the ocean. Unfortunately, her parents had different plans for her. They wanted her to marry a wealthy man named Mr. Edwards, who was twice her age at 50 years old. However, Sophie's heart belonged to someone else. Sophie had fallen in love with a charming young man named Ethan, who was just 28 years old. They had met at a local cafe, where they would often spend hours talking, laughing, and sharing their dreams. They had created a special bond, and Sophie couldn't imagine her life without him. But when Sophie's parents discovered her love for Ethan, they were shocked and disapproved of the relationship. They believed that marrying a rich man like Mr. Edwards would secure Sophie's future and bring prosperity to their family. Sophie's parents insisted that she forget about Ethan and accept their decision. Chapter 2. The Unfortunate Compromise. Although Sophie was deeply saddened by her parents' decision, she felt trapped and obliged to obey them. The glittering jewels and luxurious clothes that awaited her seemed like a small consolation. On the day of the wedding, the atmosphere was filled with grandeur and festivity. The guests were mesmerized by the lavish decorations and extravagant feast. Sophie, however, was far from joyful. She couldn't help but think about Ethan and the life they could have had together. The ceremony began, and Sophie and Mr. Edwards signed their marriage certificate. Sophie was now Mr. Edwards' wife. But then, suddenly, a commotion took over the room. Mr. Edwards collapsed to the floor, clutching his chest. Panic spread like wildfire, and people whispered that he had suffered a heart attack. News quickly spread that he had passed away. Chapter 3. Unexpected Turns. The news of Mr. Edwards' alleged death shocked everyone, especially Sophie. She was overwhelmed with mixed emotions. On one hand, she felt guilty for secretly wishing for a way out of the marriage. On the other hand, a glimmer of hope sparked within her heart, knowing that she might have a chance to be with Ethan. In the midst of the chaos, Sophie's parents approached her with a surprising proposition. They suggested that she marry Ethan instead, as they had come to realize the depth of their daughter's love for him. Overjoyed by this unexpected turn of events, Sophie eagerly agreed. On the same day, amidst the confusion and whispers of the recent events, Sophie and Ethan had a simple yet heartfelt wedding ceremony. They exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through thick and thin. It seemed like a dream come true for Sophie, who finally felt that her true love had triumphed. However, just as Sophie and Ethan were about to celebrate their newfound happiness, an astonishing revelation unfolded. Mr. Edwards, who was presumed dead, made a dramatic return. He had survived the heart attack and was determined to reclaim his place as Sophie's husband. Confusion and shock swept through the room as Mr. Edwards confronted Sophie, Ethan, and her parents. Sophie's parents were torn between their daughter's happiness and their sense of duty. Mr. Edwards, though older and weakened, demanded that Sophie fulfill her marital commitment to him. Caught in a whirlwind of emotions and torn between the two men in her life, Sophie found herself at a crossroads. She had to make a decision that would shape her future. Would she honor the marriage vows she made with Ethan, or would she succumb to the pressure and fulfill her obligations toward Mr. Edwards? Chapter 4. A Twist of Fate. Sophie stood before the perplexed crowd, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. Mr. Edwards, filled with disappointment and hurt, saw an opportunity to regain control over the situation. "Enough of this nonsense," Mr. Edwards exclaimed, his voice trembling with anger. "Sophie, you are my wife, and I demand that you come with me. If you refuse, I will not hesitate to file a legal case against you and your lover." Sophie's heart sank, torn between her love for Ethan and the fear of legal consequences. In that moment, she made a difficult choice. She turned to Ethan, her eyes filled with sadness and regret. "Ethan, I love you with all my heart, but I cannot bear the burden of legal battles and the uncertainty it brings," Sophie said, her voice trembling. "For now, I will go with Mr. Edwards. But please understand that my heart will always belong to you." Ethan, though devastated by Sophie's decision, respected her strength and sacrifice. He held her hand tightly, silently promising to wait for her and fight for their love. As Sophie and Mr. Edwards left the wedding venue, their path forward seemed uncertain. However, fate had a different plan in store for them. Just as they arrived at Mr. Edwards' residence, Sophie was suddenly gripped by a severe panic attack, gasping for breath and clutching her chest. Mr. Edwards, shocked and concerned for Sophie's well-being, quickly abandoned his demands and rushed her to the hospital. In that moment, he realized the futility of forcing someone into a loveless marriage. He understood that love cannot be controlled or compelled. Days turned into weeks as Sophie fought her way back to health, supported by a caring medical team and her concerned parents. During her recovery, Sophie reflected upon the events that had transpired and the immense sacrifices she had made. One day, while sitting by Sophie's bedside, Mr. Edwards spoke softly, his voice filled with remorse and understanding. "Sophie, I have come to realize that forcing someone into a marriage against their will only leads to pain and suffering. I release you from any obligations and promises we made. It is clear that your heart belongs to another." Sophie, still weak but filled with gratitude, managed a faint smile. She had longed for this acceptance from Mr. Edwards, knowing that true happiness could only be found with Ethan. She whispered her thanks, assuring Mr. Edwards that she bore no ill will toward him. After Sophie's complete recovery, she and Ethan were finally given a second chance at love. Surrounded by their loved ones, they pledged their commitment to one another in a heartfelt ceremony. This time, their union was not marred by societal expectations or external pressures.